So then one motor unit is going to contract, have a weak contraction through that entire muscle fiber. But if you have a lot of motor units, you're going to have to use a lot of those nerve impulses to get the whole muscle to contract all together. So then we talk about muscle tone. Right? So muscle tone is the amount of tension that's applied now. So some muscles are going to be more flaccid, and some muscles are going to have more muscle tone in them, depending on if they're important for posture. So I have, since I'm standing up here, some of my muscles have more muscle tone in them versus if you're sitting, they're most necessarily relaxed. And then people can have disorders of muscle tone. They can have too much muscle tone and not enough muscle tone. Right? So you can have two different types of paralysis. You can have flaccid paralysis, or you can have spastic paralysis. You know, like when you see somebody that has cerebral palsy, right? What kind of they have this kind of paralysis, like this is tight, and they're walking like this, right? So their muscles are tight, so they have an increased muscle tone. Whereas if somebody has a spinal injury and they have paralysis in their lower extremity, you lift it up and it just drops down like that. Because they have muscle tone. So you can have increased muscle tone or decreased muscle tone, but what you want to do is have just the right amount. Right? So that's where you think that part of your nervous system, like your cerebellum and things that control your muscle tone. So you need to be able to move your muscles so you don't want ones to be too tight. It keeps you from being able to move. You want to have the right amount of muscle tone so that you can move the muscles and so they can respond to stimulus. Right? And then you have spinal, reflexes, right? Those are that one here. Right? So there's receptors in those tendons that sense tension. So what you're doing when you're doing a reflex is you're giving a short stretch to that muscle tendon. Right? That's causing the stimulation in those sensory organs in that tendon. It sends a signal to the spinal cord, and that sends a signal back to the muscle. Okay? What makes them reflexes is that you don't think about it. It just goes to your spinal cord and then back. It doesn't go to your brain. You think about it. It's a reflex action. That's why they call it reflex. Okay, so we have just a couple other things we'll go through, and then we'll take it. So this is something that may or may not come up, and not necessarily getting into for this class, but maybe in terms of talk about it a lot in physical therapy or rehab or something like that. When you talk about exercise, you divide it into two different things. You have open chain exercise and closed chain. And then the difference is, and you're pretty much talking about that with extremities. Right? So either your arms or your legs. So if you have an open chain, is the reason what you think of it is that what the chain means is you have a chain of joints. It's like one thing's connected to the other. It's on the knee joint, it's connected to the ankle joint, all that stuff. So if you have a closed chain, your extremity's locked at the distal end, whereas this is open chain. So this is the distal end of the lower extremity, right? This anchored, it has a weight on it, but it's not in contact with a solid surface. So that's open chain exercise. So if you're doing you're doing weights like this, that's open chain exercise, versus if I'm doing like this, lunges and squats and things like that, that's a closed chain exercise. Okay? So when you apply that to the upper extremity, if I'm doing curls like this with barbells or dumbbells or whatever, what kind is that, open or closed?
Open.
So then what would be an example of a closed chain exercise for the upper extremity? Push-ups. So a lot of times, sometimes there's more benefit for doing closed chain exercises in the lower extremity because it's not involving other muscles, and you do different rehab training types of things to stimulate proprioception and things like that. But just for the purpose of this is that later on when you talk about movement and you hear the word open chain and closed chain, you can say, yeah, I know what this is. And when you talk about trunk movements, you don't really use open chain, closed chain for that. So that's just a whole other issue. So now we'll talk about exercise. So you have two different main categories of exercise. Anybody want to guess what those be? Yeah. And here's one, aerobic and anaerobic. So aerobic is going to have to do more with gas exchange, so you have capillaries. That's more cardiovascular type of exercise, right? And then it's going to have to do with the number of mitochondria, because you're burning energy with the more aerobic exercise. And it's going to synthesize myoglobin. And then you have resist exercise. Okay, so that's going to be anaerobic. Right? Or you call it anaerobic. So that's where you get this type of thing. So you get muscle hypertrophy, right? Or as these guys would say, right? You guys know who that is, right? Arms and fronts, right? You get more pumpitude. So anaerobic is going to pump you up, right? Okay. So you can have more mitochondria too, more filaments, more glycogen stores. The glycogen is like where your muscles are going to store energy, so they're going to be able to access it. So you're going to need that more anaerobic. And when I was looking for pictures, like, okay, here, this other one. So when you overload muscles, you're going to get the hypertrophy. So the more work you put on the muscle, the more it's going to be forced to develop itself more. Just like when we talked about the bone, the more force you put on the bone, the more the bone is forced to develop, right? So you have to keep pumping it more to get more gains, right? But there's, and I don't know if it's an accurate picture or if it's real, but there's some stuff on there if you Google like Arnold or something like that. It shows like the before and after. And so it shows a picture of him in his bathing suit. It doesn't look like that anymore. If that's really him, you never know what people do nowadays with images. But I didn't put that up there, so if you want to see that, you're going to have to do that on your own. Okay. So now, what we're going to be doing a lot of times, we're going to talk about muscles and the names of muscles and the origin and insertions. I'm going to get that later up here. Okay? But that's the way it is. You're going to have to learn the muscles, learn the names, origin, insertions, and actions. That's going to be a lot of what we do from this point on. We'll talk about bones, and we'll talk about the landmarks on the bones, because the reason why you need to know those is because those are where the muscles attach. And the more you can understand where those attachments are on the bones, you can understand the movement of the muscle better. But also you need to know those, like I mentioned before, for point location. Right? A lot of these, the ones that, like I mentioned before, if you in the notes, if you look for wherever the thumb is. And also on this side, there was more versions of the landmarks you need to know. I took some of them off. So there's basically one version that says, I think it's for the final, where it just has that whole list with all the different numbers. If you know all of those, that's the final palpation exam. So then the other list, the final one is derived from the other list, which goes through and it talks about different regions of the body, the face, the head, the neck, the arms, stuff like that. So, you know, it's like when we talk about all these muscles that the students say, well, we got to know all of that. You have to know all those muscles, all those origins, insertions. So you need to try to find ways that's going to help you to learn it, okay? And it seems to me that there's easier ways to help you to find out to learn muscles than there is to study herbs. Because at least some of this makes sense. Like some of these things will go through the naming and things, the names, the words have a meaning. Okay? So when we're talking about naming muscles, the more you can try to break down the name of the muscle, it's going to give you a head start to try to understand what its origin, insertion, action, and things like that. Okay, so it's going to be named by the location of the muscle. So some of the things we have already talked about, you know some kind of locations. Like if we say temporalis, where do you guess that's pretty much going to be somewhere in this area, right? Yeah. And then intercostal, where's that going to be? Between the ribs. And then it has to do with the shape. So if you know different words for different shapes, like deltoid, you've heard of like triangle shape, or if you know the animal house, right? What's the name of the friend? Delta house, right? So it's a triangle. So the deltoid is going to be a triangle muscle.